Well, good morning, my grandchildren. It's Wednesday morning. I went to the food store this morning and got some groceries. And it's a beautiful day here in Oklahoma. And we're ready to read the last chapter in our book, The Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And the last chapter is titled The Deer in the Wood. And so, if you remember where we were last time, they had worked hard and gotten the harvest in and used the threshing machine and everything and got a lot of work done quickly with the new machine, and Paul was happy and they got all their produce away. So now it's coming on towards fall, the end of the year, and Laura tells about Paul going hunting. Well, the grass was dry and withered, and the cows must be taken out of the woods and kept in the barn now to be fed. And all the bright colored leaves became dull and brown, and the cold fall rains began to come down. There was no more playing under the trees, but Paul was in the house when it rained, and he began again to play the fiddle after supper, and when the rain stopped, the weather grew colder and colder. And in the early mornings, everything sparkled with frost. The days were growing short now, and the little fire burned all day long in the cook stove just to keep the house warm. Winter was not far away. The attic and the cellar were both full of good things once more, and Laura and Mary had started to make patchwork quilts again, and everything was beginning to be snug and cozy again. And one night, when he came in from doing the chores, Paul said that after supper he would go out to his deer lick and watch for a deer. There had been no fresh meat to have in the little house since spring, but now the fawns were grown, and Paul would go hunting again. Paul had made a deer lick in an open place in the woods with the trees nearby with which he could sit in and watch. Well, a deer lick is a place where the deer come to get salt. When they found the salty place in the ground, they would come there and lick it. That's what a deer lick was. Well, Paul had made a deer lick by sprinkling some salt over the ground. And after supper, Paul took his gun and went into the woods, and Laura and Mary went to sleep without any stories or any music this night. As soon as they woke up in the morning, they ran to the window, but there was no deer hanging in the trees. Paul had never gone hunting before and not gotten a deer. When he came home, Laura and Mary didn't know what to think. All day long, Paul was busy. He was banking the little house and the barn with dead leaves and straw and stuff. He held it down by stones to keep out the cold weather. The weather grew colder and colder all day long. And that night, there was once more a fire on the hearth in the fireplace, and the windows were shut up tightly and chinked for the winter. After supper, Paul took Laura on his knees, and while Mary sat close by in her little chair, and Paul said, "Now I'll tell you why you had no fresh meat to eat today. When I went out to the deer lick, I climbed up into the big old oak tree, and I found a place on a branch where I was comfortable, and I could watch the deer lick. I was near enough to shoot. I could shoot any animal that came to it, and my gun was loaded and ready on my knee. And there I sat, and I waited for the moon to rise up in the sky and light the clearing. And I was a little tired from chopping wood all day yesterday, and I must have fallen asleep because I found myself just opening my eyes. The big round moon was just rising, and I could see where the moon was between the bare branches of the trees. It was low in the sky, and right against it, I saw a deer standing there. His head was up, and he was listening. His great branching horns stood out above his head. He was dark against the moon. It was a perfect shot. I could have easily killed him, but he was so beautiful. He looked so strong and so free and so wild, I just couldn't kill him. So I sat there and looked at him until he bounded away into the dark woods. Then I remembered Ma and my little girls were waiting for me to bring home some fresh good venison. I made up my mind next time I got a shot, I'd shoot. So after a while, a big old bear came lumbering along out in the open. He was so fat from feasting on berries and roots and grubs, and all summer he was nearly as large as two bears. His head swayed from side to side as he went along on all fours across the clear space in the moonlight until he came to a rotten log. He smelled at it and listened for a while, and then he pawed it apart and sniffed among the broken pieces, and he ate up the white fat grubs that were there. When he stood up on his hind legs, perfectly still, looking all around him, he seemed to be suspicious that something was wrong. He was trying to see or smell what it was. He was a perfect mark to shoot at, but I was just so interested in watching him, and the woods were so peaceful in the moonlight that I forgot all about my gun. I didn't even think of shooting him until he was waddling off into the woods. Well, this will never do, I thought. I'll never get any meat this way. So I settled myself in the tree and I waited again. This time I was determined I'd shoot the next game I saw. The moon had risen higher and the moonlight was bright on the open space, and all around the shadows were dark among the trees, and after a long while a doe and her yearling fawn came stepping out daintily out of the shadows. They were not afraid at all. They walked over to the place where I had sprinkled the salt on the ground, and they both licked up a little bit of it. Then they raised their heads and looked at each other, and the fawn stepped over and stood beside the doe, and they just stood there together, looking off into the woods. The moonlight was shining on them, and their large eyes were shiny and soft, and I just sat there and looked at them until, well, they walked away into the shadows. I climbed down out of the tree and just came home. I thought, I'm not going to shoot anything. Laura whispered in his ear, I'm glad you didn't shoot him, Paul. Mary said, well, we can eat bread and butter. Paul lifted Mary up out of her chair and hugged them both together. You're my good girls, he said, and now it's bedtime. Run along while I get my fiddle. So Laura and Mary, when they had said their prayers and were tucked snugly under the trundle bed covers, Paul was sitting by the firelight with the fiddle, and Ma had blown out the lamp because she did not need its light anymore. And on the other side of the hearth, she was swaying gently back and forth in her rocking chair. Her knitting needles were flashing in and out above the sock that she was knitting, and the long winter evenings of firelight and music had come again. Pa's fiddle was wailing away, and Pa was a-singing, oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. I'm a-going to California for the gold dust for to see. Then Pa began to play again. He played the song about old Grimes, but he didn't sing the words that he'd sung when Ma was making cheese. This time the words were different. Pa's strong, sweet voice was softly singing, shall old acquaintance be forgot, shall ne'er brought to mind? Shall old acquaintance be forgot, and the days of old lang syne? The days of old lang syne, my friend, the days of old lang syne. Shall old acquaintance be forgot, and the days of old lang syne? When the fiddle had finally stopped singing, Laura called out softly, well, what are days of old lang syne, Pa? Well, they're days of a long time ago, Pa said. Now, go to sleep, Laura. But Laura lay awake for a little while, listening to Pa's fiddle softly playing, the lonely sound of the wind in the big woods. She looked at Pa sitting on the bench by the hearth, the firelight gleaming on his brown hair, his beard glistening off the honey brown fiddle. She looked at Ma gently rocking back and forth and knitting her sock, and she thought to herself, this was now. She was glad for the cozy house. She was glad for Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music. And she was glad it was now. They could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now, and it can never be a long, long time ago. And that's the end of the storybook about the Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I hope you've enjoyed being together with me and enjoyed hearing some of the songs. And I'll come up with another book for tomorrow. But I love you, kids. I hope you have a good day. Please honor the Lord in what you do and what you say. And we'll see you soon. Love you. Bye.